Dannion Brinkley died.
I was hit in the head with a bolt of lightning that went down my spine. It welded the nails of the heels of my shoes in the floor. I was declared dead for 28 minutes. I was completely paralyzed. They had decided that I was not going to make it. They covered me with a sheet, filled out paperwork, and rolled me into a room next to the emergency room because it was very busy that night.
At this point, Dannion Brinkley believes he floated out of his body and into a tunnel of light. The fact that the experience is directly related to the state of a dying brain is an important one. It suggests that there is a program built in to deal with life-threatening circumstances. Most of the brain shuts down during such a crisis, but it seems that consciousness continues to function and to survive in at least one special area.
We've even shown that the near-death experience is localized to a specific area in our brain, the deep temporal lobe and associated structures. And that area of the brain starts to function quite normally when people die to allow us to see, interact with, and perhaps even enter into other spiritual realities.
The lower right side of the brain normally deals with emotion, but if Dr. Morse is right, it could also be where our personality takes refuge during a crisis. And memories of this may well have a spiritual flavor for those who recover.
They may have become more intuitive, more open to certain things. And this could be because their brain has actually been changed by the trauma that they've been through.
Dannion Brinkley not only came back from the dead, but was profoundly changed by the experience. The combat-trained Marine had become a gentle, highly intuitive individual.
I began to perceive things around people. When a person touched me, I could tell things about them. I can see movies, what appears to be movies about people, and I can see events that are transpiring in their lives and what's going on.
Dannion claims that some of the visions he gets since being struck by lightning are not only telepathic, but also prophetic.
I could see what looked like power plants. I could hear the sound of this roar, and then I saw the explosion. What it was telling me was that radioactive fallout would be covering in great clouds, and that thousands and thousands of people would die from this. And the word came to me, wormwood.
It turns out that wormwood is not only a common aromatic herb, but a literal translation of the Ukrainian word Chernobyl. Dannion Brinkley had, it seems, prophesied the disaster that took place there in 1986 with the meltdown of a nuclear power generator.
Dannion Brinkley is probably one of the most extraordinary near-death experiencers that I've encountered in more than 20 years of talking with such people. He has rather remarkable gifts for, I guess you could say, prophecy and for psychic abilities.
Dannion Brinkley is now the author of a best-selling book about his experiences and a much sought-after lecture on the subject of life after death. But he is not the only person to have gone through a near-death experience and found that this changed his life and gave him unexpected new talents.
We find from the research that we have done, and I mean many people working in this field, that it is actually fairly common for many near-death experiencers to report an enhancement of psychic sensitivities. In fact, it's more common than not.
This man is thinking of the next big thing. Maybe it's the future of genetics, or the technology to travel to other planets. It could be a renewable energy source, a way to extend our lifespan, or even artificial intelligence.
In 1970, while serving with the US Army on the Rhine, 24-year-old Joe Mcmoneagle suffered from what appeared to be a lethal heart attack while leaving a restaurant one evening.
I looked up, and half in and half out of this doorway was a body, and I recognized it as my own. And at that point, I knew that something very terrible was going on.
Joe believes it was this near-death experience that left him with some unusual psychic abilities.
I started having these spontaneous knowings, and the spontaneous knowings were kind of unique in that I'd never had them before. It was more of an awareness of when something was going to happen before it happened.
At the same time that Chief Warrant Officer Joe Mcmoneagle returned to his job in the Army, the Pentagon was beginning to get interested in the possibility that psychics could be a useful addition to their Cold War armory. This interest was sparked by intelligence to suggest that in addition to ballistic missiles, the Soviet Union was heavily involved in parapsychology. Although most Western scientists considered psychic research to be futile, the intelligence community in the United States was deeply concerned. So top-secret programs on both sides were set up to explore the training necessary to produce psychic spies. At the CIA, interest focused on remote viewing, on the possibility that some people could gather information by traveling out of their bodies to remote places. So they set up a classified investigation in California at the Stanford Research Institute, already headed by laser physicist Harold Puthoff, who had a background in naval intelligence.
They asked if I'd be willing to have a small program to investigate this, and so I said sure, thinking it would just be a little sideline to my laser research. We ended up briefing at lots of places, CIA, DIA, Army intelligence, and so on.
For security reasons, the CIA recruited potential subjects from within the military, looking for candidates who already showed some sort of intuitive ability.
Laying there in my personal folder was the information about the near-death experience, and they found that I would probably be a pretty good candidate as a result.
So Mcmoneagle and a group of other potential remote viewers were set up under a project with the code name of Stargate. They began work in a windowless room under the scrutiny of remote cameras which recorded everything. They were asked at first to make themselves comfortable and to concentrate on the movements of another person who was sent to a remote location somewhere else in the United States. They were given no information at all about that place and instructed simply to project their awareness out and to draw whatever came into their minds as a result.
When we first started thinking that, well, maybe this is kind of a telepathic thing, we would send somebody to a site, and the remote viewer would have to describe where that person was. And we assumed that, well, maybe he's sort of sending his visual images by some brainwaves or whatever. But it turned out that we found that a person might be sent to stand in front of a building, and that person may not know what's in the building. And the remote viewer would then describe the building, but then he would also go inside the building and describe what's inside the building, something that the outbound person didn't know.
It soon became obvious that the sender was unnecessary. Information was not telepathic. The receivers, somehow, were traveling out to observe the target site for themselves. There were no geographic limits to this project.
One of the early remote viewing experiments we did just to see how far we could look was a remote viewing of Jupiter before one of the NASA flybys. And in fact, a thin ring around Jupiter was discovered by a remote viewer and published in advance of NASA knowing it was there.
This early foray into the solar system convinced the CIA that they could work without a remote sender. No one had to go behind enemy lines. So in 1974, they began operational viewing of the Soviet Union with an attempt to spy out the ground around a target in the Kazakh Republic of Semipalatinsk. The remote viewer was given the coordinates and told only that it was a research facility. He spent a whole week focusing on the target, and during that time produced a detailed drawing of a gigantic crane with 8 wheels, each twice the size of a man, being rolled between a complex of buildings. He described the layout of the site and saw workers welding what looked like drums 60 feet in diameter. Dr. Puthoff and his colleagues thought these could be structures designed to contain explosions. And when the Air Force finally obtained an aerial photograph which could be graphically enhanced, it showed astonishing similarities to the drawings produced by the remote viewer. The crane on wheels was there, and the drum-like structures, which had clearly been produced for testing low-yield nuclear weapons. Joe Mcmoneagle, in his turn, was asked to view another target in the Soviet Union, and instead of coordinates was given a picture of part of the structure.
We were able to hypothesize that they were building a very large submarine. It was a new kind of submarine that it carried canted missile tubes, which implied it had a cruise missile capability. And so we predicted that within 110 days it would be launched. And in fact, it was launched within 4 days of our predicted date.
In 1979, the US Embassy in Tehran was under siege. Some of its staff were held hostage. Joe and his colleagues were asked what information they could provide to help the White House make appropriate plans.
They essentially came in and threw 200 or 300 photographs on a table and said, please tell us who the hostages are and where they're being held and what their condition is. We were able to do that, as well as point out that there were 3 or 4 additional hostages being held in a different location.
The Stanford remote viewers were not always accurate, but their surprisingly high success rate made them very popular with several government agencies.
At its height, it was being used on almost every major security issue. Just file cabinets and file cabinets and file cabinets full of data, which probably will not be declassified in our lifetime.
In 1995, Stargate was officially closed down. Not because it didn't work. The overall hit rate was an astonishing 25%, but even that was not enough to secure further funding. Stargate became yet another casualty of the end of the Cold War. The special talents of Joe Mcmoneagle and Dannion Brinkley seem to have been released by a near-death experience. But there may be less drastic ways to enhance such abilities. Do the answers lie in sleep and dreams? Or is there some simple technique for altering our normal state of consciousness? The near-death experience has a profound effect on our brains, but something almost as strange happens to us several times every night. Our heartbeat becomes irregular, our brain waves speed up, our eyes move rapidly to and fro, and our muscles relax in a way that amounts almost to paralysis. This is dream sleep, and it remains one of our most mysterious patterns of behavior.
Dreams are a big mystery in our field. No one really knows where dreams are generated in the brain. No one really knows the significance of dreams, but there really is no consensus among sleep specialists regarding what the purpose of dreams are and where they're generated.
Dreaming is a state which differs from both sleep and wakefulness. It is vital to our health, giving the brain time to regroup and to conduct its own repairs. But it seems also to give us access to outside information. In 1978, psychologist Charles Tart performed a classic experiment with a young woman. She claimed to be able, while dreaming, to travel out of her body.
It was normal for her to wake up sometime during the night and perceive herself floating near the ceiling